that are anticipated for the United States. Now, the Bloomberg Agricultural Spot Index, it just surged to the most in 9 years. And it actually looks quite alarming, and a lot of companies are warning that there's a lot of things that go into production that are really going to derail the whole system. Now, of course, Coca-Cola, they said that they have been tracking the higher cost in plastic and aluminum, as well as their high fructose corn syrup, which is a key ingredient in their product. It actually is one of the leading reasons that people pass away as well. It's also destroying humanity. It's a very addictive substance that they add into it simply because it is addictive and it's in almost all foods. Many doctors who have researched into high fructose corn syrup have really warned about its effects on people, so Coca-Cola isn't doing anyone any favors. But the truth is, they said that their products are about to rise in price. Everything is about to rise in price, according to some of this data here. Now, with global food prices already at the highest since the middle of 2014, this latest huge jump is being watched by staple crops. Of course, they are a big influence on grocery shelves, anywhere from bread, pizza dough, meat, soda. Now, I wanted to cover the comments from Chris Nicoy. He's from the World Food Program's regional director. And he said, quote, "The relentless rise in prices act as a misery multiplier, driving millions deeper into hunger and desperation. It's pushing a basic meal beyond the reach of millions of poor families who were already struggling to get by," unquote. Now, commodities aren't the only reason that prices are driving up. Everything is going up at once. You have the higher freight costs, the supply chain disruptions they keep talking about, the packaging, as we just covered with the aluminum and plastic. There's also coffee that's a shortage. Now, Nestle, they're the world's largest food company. They warned they will not be able to hedge all of their commodity costs, and they are going to be raising their prices when appropriate. Now, really getting out of hand would be corn futures. Just about everything's up, but corn is soaring. Soybean futures, they're soaring. The price of hogs is soaring. Right now, cattle, it remains kind of subdued compared to everything else. It's at a 1-year high, but the rest, they're at 7 to 8 year highs. Now, I also wanted to touch on this Bank of America report, which said, "Buckle up, inflation is here." And they warned that inflation is, quote, "arguably the biggest topic during this earnings season, with a broad array of sectors, consumer, industrials, materials, citing inflation pressures," unquote. Their data revealed a very disturbing trend, and it showed that the share of companies that mentioned inflation during their earnings call has absolutely gone insane, and they've more than tripled year over year per company. And the biggest jump in history since Bank of America has started keeping records back in 2004. Now, the reason this is a problem, the number of mentions has historically led the CPI by a quarter, with 52% correlation, and it does point to higher inflation about to break out across every sector. Now, Bank of America, they went through key inflation commentaries from earnings calls, and they said that raw materials, transportation, labor, of course, and we look at the fact that people are not willing to go and work for small businesses, and this is the only type of inflation the Federal Reserve pays attention to, is that we are probably going to see rising wages because people simply do not want to work. They won't go in. So the companies that can't afford to pay those extra wages, they're not going to get any employees. And for the most part, everyone else is probably just going to wait for the checks rather than going and working for the old wages. Now, they said that these are going to be some of the sources for inflation, because if they're going to be increasing the amount they need to pay people to get them to come in, they're going to need to increase the amount they're charging consumers. So it's kind of a catch-22. Now, they pointed to industrials, and they said, quote, "We are experiencing significant material cost inflation, particularly for steel, fuel, and transportation costs." They covered staples, and they said, quote, "Looking ahead, as we've experienced higher inflationary environment, our first line of defense will continue to be our strong holistic margin management cost savings program. In addition, we're taking actions now and in the coming months to drive net price realization that will benefit our fiscal year 2022, so higher prices." They also covered CAG and staples. They said, quote, "We're seeing input cost inflation accelerate in many of our categories and across the energy industry." They cited LW. They also saw staples, and they said, quote, "While the crisis-related effects on our supply chain were the primary drivers of our cost increases, We're also realizing higher costs due to input cost inflation in the low single digits. We expect that rate will begin to tick up in the coming quarters as edible oil and transportation costs continue to increase. Cited STZ said, quote, similar to previous years, we're expecting substantial inflation headwinds in the low to mid-single digit increase range, largely related to glass and other packaging materials, raw materials, transportation, and labor costs in Mexico. They cited PPG. They said, quote, we experienced a significant acceleration of raw materials and logistics costs inflation during the quarter. Coming into the year, we were expecting an inflationary environment and had prioritized selling price increases across all of our businesses. This has helped us achieve solid price increases year to date. With a higher inflation backdrop, we've already secured further selling price increases and are in the process of executing additional ones during the second quarter, unquote. They covered DOV from industrials, quote, we're going to fight against between now and the end of the year is inflationary input cost between raw materials, labor, and price per cost. The way it's looking, we may have to intervene on price again in certain of the business over the balance of the year, unquote. They covered TEL in the tech sector. Quote, I would expect our margins to modestly improve as we work our way forward here into the third and fourth quarter based on some of the actions that are underway and our ability to combat some of the inflationary pressures out there. Certainly, we're feeling the biggest inflation right now is on the freight side. The freight inflation has been significant, and as we have battled through there, and there's a variety of reasons for that, including higher air freight and so forth in terms of that, and that's not unique to TE. Certainly, I think that we have been as much publicized across the overall supply chain. Labor costs is not a major issue on the inflation side, but labor availability in certain places that are still being more impacted by the crisis continue to drive some inefficiencies. They covered CMG. They said, quote, so all of that is very, very manageable, and we feel like if there's going to be significant increase in inflation because of market-driven and because of federal minimum wage, we think everybody in the restaurant industry is going to have to pass along those costs to the consumers. Now that seems to be a big thing, passing the cost to the consumers. And if you recall, they told you that the reason they were printing all of this money was to help the economy. To help the economy. Now you tell me how unleashing ridiculous inflation on the people to enrich themselves and their partners is helping the economy. They were never helping the economy. They were helping their friends, their criminal friends, and none for you. The only thing we get out of the deal is higher prices. Oh, and they did send us those stimulus checks no one asked for that they're going to extract from us via the inflation. Now they cited ALLE, quote, this guide incorporates pricing actions to offset direct material inflation, as well as reflecting our supply chain capability to mitigate industry challenges on supply and electronic component shortages. We anticipate that these challenges will persist for the balance of the year, and we will continue to monitor and adapt to changing market conditions. And they covered WHR, which said, quote, the global material cost inflation, in particular in steel and